Thank you for helping. Whenever I come to a conference, the first person I want to meet when I walk into the conference room is the audio tech guy. So Ruben, we're going to make this happen. Thank you for getting the video working. And I'll go to these PowerPoints in a second. But first, I want to recognize that we are in Treaty 4 territory. I recognize the 11 First Nations from this area. And when I got here last night, and I've been to Regina a couple times. In fact, I have to go back to January of 1979 when I first got here. It was my first time ever on a plane. Like most young Native youth, I didn't know what I wanted to do after I finished high school. But I knew I had the old res rule from my mom. I was raised by a single mother. Go to school, get a job, or get out. And I got interested, probably when I was about 16 years old, in Native issues. Coming from a reserve, growing up on a reserve, I thought, well, why are Native people the first peoples of this land? And I want to dispense the first myth this country ever put forward, that the founding peoples are the English and the French. Any anthropology, even your own science would say that's wrong. The founding peoples of North America are the tribal people. And like many Cree people here in the South, are the Blackfoot people, the Mohawk people, the Okanagan people, my people, we're a cross-border tribe. When the Canadians and Americans decided to draw an imaginary line through our territories and create the United States and Canada, they cut my people in half. Half of my people are on a reservation, the term they use in the States. In Canada, it's reserves. The reserve or reservation system of the founding fathers of both those countries, it's the same system. You look in the old documents, and that's when I first started studying the old documents. I was at the University of Regina. At that time, it was called the Saskatchewan Indian Federated College. That's where I first went to university. So I owe a lot to the Cree people of this territory. This is where I first got educated on how to be a chief, how to be a leader, was in this city. I stayed here one semester. Coming from the Okanagan, one of the warmest places in the country. It was cold when I got here in January, and it was cold when I left in April of 1979. I transferred the following September to Lethbridge, University of Lethbridge. Again there, Native American Studies was my major. I was writing term papers about land claims and treaties when I was 19 years old. So I've been doing this stuff of doing my research on why Native people in two of the richest countries of the world, why are Native people at the bottom of the socioeconomic stats in this country? I heard from some of the speakers earlier, and it's something to brag about. There's nothing wrong with that. That the unemployment rate in Canada is 6%. And it's something to brag about, that the unemployment rate in Regina or Saskatchewan is 3%. That's something to be proud of. But something not to be proud of is the unemployment rate. The unemployment rates on most reserves here in Saskatchewan is not single digit. The unemployment rate on most of the reserves in this province exceed 50%. You guys should talk about that. Not just talk about the fact that there's 6% unemployment rate in Canada or 3% unemployment rate in Regina. In school, they talk about the Great Depression. You know what the unemployment rate at its height during the Great Depression was? And I still hear some old-timers talk about how tough it was and how bad it was during the Great Depression. Great Depression, unemployment rates were around 30%. So do the math. The fact is, most Native people in this country have been living under a Great Depression for over 100 years. And so when I was a teenager here in Regina, I went to school on why are Native people, why are First Nations at the bottom of the totem pole? And 30 years later, there's been changes. And I'll talk about some of those changes. The first person I always meet when I land in a city is a cab driver. This is part of my ongoing research. I love talking to cab drivers. And like the cab driver that picked me up last night, they have an accent. Most cab drivers, not all, but most have an accent. You ever notice that? They didn't come from this country. They didn't grow up in this country. He was from Pakistan. He had an accent. And every time I catch a cab, I always ask them, so how are the First Nation, how are the Native people in this city? How are they doing, in your opinion? How are the Native people in this city doing? The other thing I tell cab drivers is my ongoing research. I want you to be totally honest with me. And there's nothing you can say that will make me ashamed of being First Nation. Absolutely nothing. We went through residential schools for over 100 years. The broken treaties, the land claims issues that occur in every province, the racism. We just went through Veterans Day. I was at a veterans ceremony. And I said at that ceremony, and this is a fact, every time Canada and America went to war overseas, who volunteered? What race of people volunteered at the highest level, volunteering to defend this country? What race of people? The veterans know this. Canadian military and U.S. military know what the answer is. It was the tribal people. After all that was done to us, all the bad stuff, whenever it came to defend those flags, Native people on the reserves and the reservations volunteered at the highest level of any other ethnic group in this country. That's a fact. And even though we weren't allowed to vote, our men and women volunteered. So I asked this cab driver, I said, be totally honest with me. I'll tip you better. I always love tipping cab drivers because they have a very tough job. But most cab drivers didn't grow up in this country. This is what most cab drivers tell me once I tell them I'm going to tip them better. I want you to be honest. How are the Native people in this city? Oh, most Native people are drunks. Most Native people are lazy. Most First Nations people don't want to work. The time I see most Native people is on that one day of the month, when it's welfare day. And they catch the taxis to go to the liquor store. That's what I hear from most cab drivers in this country. And Native people get free housing and free education. That's also what cab drivers tell me. Even Justin Bieber thinks Native people get free gas. At Osoyoos, we own 2 gas stations. I've never gotten free gas, and I'm the chief of that community. The fact is, Native people have never gotten anything free from this country. Not one thing. We have never gotten anything free. And then I asked him, where do most Native people in the city live? Not all, I said most. I said, is there a place here still called the Hood? He said, yeah. In his accent, he said, yeah. I said, that's where a lot of Native people live, I bet, still. He nods his head. He says, yes, sir. So we got to talk about that. And don't shove it underneath the political rug. Regina, don't shove it under the political rug here. I had a meeting with one of your ministers here on corrections. And I asked her, I'll bet you the highest percentage of inmates in your provincial prisons are First Nations people. Is that a good guess? There's still a lot not right, not only in this province, but in my province back in BC. And again, in that meeting, I heard her chief of staff say to me, mention some guy's name that he keeps on talking about. We got to increase or do something at the federal level about the foreign worker program. Business people in this province, and even back in BC, you still talk about foreign workers, that you need foreign workers? When the First Nations people are sitting there with Great Depression unemployment rates? And the First Nations people are filling the prisons in this province? We're not on your radar screen yet. But as two of the speakers, I'm glad to hear that, and I was taking notes when they were talking. They mentioned the regional boards. And they mentioned their experience that you have to include First Nations people in your strategy. Collaboration with First Nations is a term I heard up here this morning more than once. I could read you out a text. I left my phone in my jacket. Over the weekend, I texted the mayor and council of Osoyoos. The Osoyoos Indian Band, we're right next to two small towns. Many of you have been in the Okanagan. South end of our reserve, a town called Osoyoos in my language. Non-native people couldn't speak our language, so they said Osoyoos. Penticton is also a native word, but that's not how you say it in Okanagan. Kelowna is a native word, but that's not how you say it in my language. Canada is even a native word. And get this, Quebec is a native word. And yet we keep on hearing the two founding peoples, the two founding languages of this country are French and English. That's wrong. Historical evidence proves that is wrong. So this text I got over the weekend, and we're next to the town of Oliver, so I deal with the mayor and councils from two towns. But the text I got over the weekend was from one of their, I think it was a regional district staff member, who was asking me for a letter of support for a fisheries project that they want to see happen. They want to attract more more fishermen onto our lakes in order to attract more tourism. And he said what happened was they got the letter of support from the mayor and council, sent it to the province, and their request got turned down. And now he's asking for support letters from what he called other organizations and other groups in the Okanagan. And this is what I wrote back to him, and I CC'd the mayors and councils. I said, do not ever include the Osoyoos Indian Band on a list of stakeholders. If we are on your list as stakeholders, take us off. Because as our national chief so rightly said many years ago, First Nation people are not stakeholders. We are rights holders in this country. We are not stakeholders. I will never go to a stakeholders meeting. The Osoyoos Indian Band government, we are not stakeholders in our traditional territory. We are rights holders. And when a mining company tried to open up a mine not far from our reserve a few years ago, and I learned about that mine on TV. I learned about that mine in the newspapers. And these were Americans. No, these guys were Canadians. It was a ski hill that was Americans. Again, we dealt with the ski hill development in our territory as well. So in the mining company, they wanted me to go to Vancouver after I've already read about it in the newspapers. I've already read about that they met with the mayors and councils. I already read about that they met with the Premier of British Columbia and cabinet ministers. And now they want to meet with me. So I went there with my advisors, my business advisors. I told them, I'm only going to stay in this meeting for less than 2 minutes. The time you spend in the penalty box. I said, I'm only going to stay in their fancy office for less than 2 minutes. Because all I have to say to those executives in this high-level office was, I had to read about your development in our traditional territory. Now you want to meet with us after you've met with all of these other groups. I said, that's an insult to the chief and council of the Osoyoos Indian Band. I said, you can stay here and talk to my advisors here, but I'm not staying in this room of yours because you've insulted the history of the Osoyoos people in our traditional territory. And I left. Short story. They kept on going like this. When I got home, there was more phone calls, and really what they're doing is going like this. Ski hill operation. The ski hill operation, these were American investors. Guess who they met with first? Because investors from foreign countries read the papers, listen to the news. They want to know, is it safe to invest in that country? They want to know what the First Nation people think. Because money will only go where it's safe and secure. So those American investors were smart on that ski hill. I did not have to read about it in the papers. The first group that they wanted to meet with was the chief and council of the Osoyoos Indian Band. So on both projects, we ended up signing an agreement. We, in essence, allowed that development to happen in our traditional territory. And not long ago, the Supreme Court of Canada, the highest court in this country, again, we don't get nothing from this country. Treaty rights weren't given to us. You know what happened? The government had to affirm them, had to recognize them. And it was a forced recognition. That Supreme Court of Canada court decision, it has all industry, not only in BC, but across this country, scrambling. I just got a call from a major force company. And they said, well, we're going to a conference about that Supreme Court of Canada, Williams Lake court decision. I said, good, go. Because we've forced our way back into the boardrooms of corporate Canada. We weren't invited in. Over the last number of decades, Native people all across this country, the James Bay Cree proved that in Quebec when they signed the James Bay Agreement back in the 70s, took the provincial government to court on that hydro project. I was here in Saskatchewan at a Métis place called Pine Hills? Pine House. They had me there speaking because they just signed a major $100 million IBA agreement with a mine. So it's great to be First Nation or Métis or Inuit in this time period as far as business goes. Our statistics still get a failing grade. But all over this country, we are now on the radar screen of all the natural resource companies. All the major banks have an Aboriginal strategy because they have to. So it's good times. I think this is good times. In the last decade, there's been more money and more jobs created on Indian reserves than in the previous 100 years. In my prediction, in the next decade, we're going to surpass that. There's going to be more money and more jobs created in Indian country than in the previous 100 years. So I'll talk about municipalities and provinces and First Nations, how we can work together. Still, as I mentioned in that text that I sent over the weekend, there's still this learning curve that has to go on. Because when I get back home, I know what the mayor and council of Osoyoos are going to be doing. They're going to be going like this to me. They're going to be apologizing. That's okay. Because when it comes to fishing and hunting, nobody gave us those things. Those are our inherent rights. And in that text I sent, I said, you guys want a history lesson on the Okanagan? You cannot talk about fishing, salmon fishing in the Okanagan without including the Okanagan people. Why did you even think you could go to the province without us? And now we're an afterthought. Well, I think after they get that email, they're going to realize that we should have been their first thought. People in this country have to realize that the original treaty relationship in Treaty 4, all the treaties, it was supposed to have been a business relationship, not a dependency relationship. Yet that's what the colonizers turned it into. They turned it into a dependency relationship. Well, I want to get back to that business relationship, which was the original treaty relationship. I hear there's urban reserves being created here in this city, just like in Winnipeg. Mayors and councils in the business community should not fear urban reserves. What you should be fearing is places like the Hood. What you should be having fear of is the unemployment rates of Native people. As I told the media earlier, one of the Clintons was being interviewed by CNN. I think it was Chelsea Clinton. And the reporter asked her, what's the number one fear? What's the biggest problem in the inner cities in America? What's the biggest problem in the inner cities? You know what she said? Unemployed young black men. You know what the biggest problem in Regina is? Unemployed young Native men. Same thing. It makes no sense to have a poor neighbor. Native people have been poor, left poor, on purpose in this country for far too long. So this is where I got my start, at Saskatchewan Indian Federated College. And I always am thankful to the Cree people from this territory for teaching me how to be a leader. I'm going to go through these slides as quickly as I can. At the border, at Osoyoos, there's this plaque. And remember, I'm a cross-border Indian. Half of my people are on the U.S. side. And my people cross this border crossing all the time. I always look at this plaque. The four-way test in anything we say, think, or do. First question, is it the truth? That is the first thing Native and non-Native people have to get to. If we can't get beyond the truth, if we can't get beyond that first question, we don't have a relationship. We will never have a business relationship. This country will always be sick. As one of my people once wrote, this country has been sick ever since the first Native treaty was broken. So that's the first question on any issue, and we say, think, or do. What's the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? I'll guarantee you this. Having a business relationship with Treaty 4 will cover off all of those things. You start having a business relationship with the First Nations people of Saskatchewan, you'll be doing the four-way test. I was wondering when a cartoon was going to be done about me. I'm actually trying to buy the original of this. I want this hanging in my office. Some chiefs get mad about this cartoon. I love it. I am not going to row or paddle in the direction of most chiefs in this country, because I do not want that handout relationship. I don't want handouts. I want self-sufficiency for my people. Other chiefs can go holler and scream at the provincial government for more money. I want making my own money. I want to create my own jobs. I want a business relationship with non-Native people. And I always buy the newspapers. I'm always reading newspapers. I always walk out of 7-Elevens with a whole stack of newspapers. Store clerks often say, "Oh, you got a lot of reading to do." I said, "No, I don't. I'm not going to read most of this garbage in this paper." After the sports sections, after I see how my Habs are doing, how my Redskins are doing, then I want to find out what are they writing about us. So I scan newspapers for the stuff that interests me. And so a lot of these clippings come from the major papers in this country. I don't like hearing our chiefs talk about poverty. I don't like that word. We need to be talking about jobs. We need to be talking about economic development. You'll never get rid of poverty if you don't have economic development. That's why urban reserves are so important, because for the first time, many reserves are having their first chance at economic development, because the reserves that they were put on, the lands that they were left with, that's why so many reserves flood in Manitoba. Whenever the settlers came, natives were often put on the marginal lands. I love it what this elder said. Our people, we need a new kind of hunter today. Hunters for jobs, education, hunters for business. This is a project, $200 million project, started construction a couple of weeks ago on my reserve. The first time ever in Indian country, on a reserve in Canada or a reservation in the States, the first time a prison is going to be built on an Indian reserve. Some of my people didn't want it, and that's okay. Because this is how I, as a leader, decide things. I have pluses on one side of the scale, minuses on the other side. And I'll listen to all the negatives, but I'll also listen to all the positives. And as a leader, I make a decision that way. People say, "Clarence, there's some negatives to having a prison on a reserve." Yeah, I heard that one. I heard that one. I heard that one. But now let's talk about the positives as well. You got to talk about both. And how that scale, where it tips, is how I make a choice. $200 million projects going to create hundreds and hundreds of jobs, 260 full-time jobs. I got applications, I got resumes from Native people across the country that want to work in this prison. And I'll be back here in Regina again. As I mentioned, I met with the minister today. Minister for Corrections, Christine, about how this first time ever a prison, a provincial prison built on an Indian reserve, how can we do it differently? How can the Aboriginal programming be done differently? How can we help the Aboriginal inmate out? They want to do that here in Saskatchewan. Well, I want to do it in BC. So I'm going to be back here. And we're going to go to school and try and figure this out. Here's a book I love reading. So I'm going to share some of my books with you. It's a problem with most Native people. They don't have a library. If you're a successful business person, one of the first things I want to see is show me your library. I want to see which books you've read that have brought you where you're at. Here's one of the things you shouldn't do: ignore outsiders. Don't attract business. Don't ignore your youth. That's what will happen if you ignore your youth here. The person that wrote this book is from this side of the border. Don't ignore your seniors. One of my teachers, Jim Rowan, always liked rereading his books and listening to his tapes. Success is a study. A lesson from Jim. We are all, whether you're native or non-native, the two major influences in your life are going to be the people you meet and the books you read. He said that two major influences in a successful person's life are the books you read and the people you meet. Another book you should read. There are no office hours for leaders. The problem I find with most leadership is they only work the easy hours. They only work the Mondays to Fridays, those in government, those in chiefs and councils. Real leaders, if you're an entrepreneur, you'll know that you have to work evenings and weekends, especially if you work in the tourism sector or the service sector. You're working evenings and weekends. Most people on my reserve work evenings and weekends. They don't work the band office hours. I always tell people, the young people, choose a leader by where you see what they're doing on evenings and weekends. Do they attend that event that's on evenings and weekends? Or are they only there during those easy hours of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 type stuff? Leadership hours are evenings and weekends. I work evenings and weekends. Once you start making your own money as an entrepreneur, you have more energy. You have more energy once you're making your own money. I love it what this chief said in the States. Economic development is my freedom program. Same for Osoyoos. Economic development is my people's freedom program. I'll leave you with this. I could go on and on about this stuff. This guy's a real chief. The time is always right to do the right thing. So Regina, you got some work ahead of you. The prisons in this province are filled with Native people. The unemployment rate of the Native people is not 6% or 3%. There's a place in this town still called the Hood. You are doing a lot of good things here. And as I mentioned, I still owe a lot to the city of Regina and the Cree people from Treaty 4 for teaching me when I was 19 years old what it takes to be a leader. And leaders often have to stand alone. I tell people back home, I'm not a politician. I will not lean which way the wind's blowing the strongest. And if I have to stand alone, even against my own family, that's what I'll do. Because I don't consider myself a politician. I consider myself a worker. People know back home, one of the best compliments I can give anybody is to say, you've earned your pay. You earn your paycheck. So with that, I want to thank Brad for being my contact here, Regional Planning Branch. Brad, you were my contact. We did a few phone calls together, exchanged a lot of emails. I can tell you're a worker. If you take emails on evenings and weekends, you're a worker. So Brad McKenzie, thank you. Limlimt in my language, which means thank you. I want to thank the organizers and the sponsors and those that brought me here, Stu, for sponsoring my presentation here. Because whether it's a powwow or a soccer tournament or a hockey tournament, it's always the business people that step forward. It's the business community that pays for everything. It's the business community that sponsors all the worthy events in a town or a city. So the Regina and Region Home Builders Association, Limlimt in my language. And as I go home, I'll be in Calgary this week working on another major project that I hope will happen. I'm meeting with some of the highest levels in the NHL executive and some of the past Stanley Cup champions to talk about building hockey arenas, not just on Indian reserves, but my reason for being there is to build hockey arenas on Indian reserves. Because if given the chance and the opportunity, Native people can compete anywhere. We just need to be given that chance and have that opportunity. And one of the other projects is called Area 27. We'll be going to a vote on that after Christmas. Jacques Villeneuve, if you know car racing, you'll know who Jacques Villeneuve is. They want to build a racetrack on our property back home, a first-class racetrack. Over this last year, I've been in some garages, seen cars stacked up on cars. And these aren't ordinary cars. I've seen some people that own cars. One car is over $1 million. And that's a project I hope to announce in the new year. I love hanging around millionaires. I don't have a love of money. As you heard in the video, there's two things I love doing. First is creating jobs. Because when somebody sits across from me, in my role as a leader of my community, there's three things I want to hear you say in this order. Three things. I want to hear you say jobs, jobs, jobs. That's what I want to hear you say. When I say the second thing I love doing is making money, we've got to admit it, we all love making money. Whether you're a teacher, the teachers just went on strike in BC again. You know why? Because they want more money. Doctors and nurses want more money. Everybody wants more money. I do not have a love of money. This is the equation that's stamped in my mind. And it's been there for a long time. Money equals opportunity. That's why the second thing I love doing is making money. Because I want opportunity for my people. When the First Nations have opportunity, you all have opportunity. So in my language, lim lim, thank you. Come to Osoyoos sometime, drink some Inkameep wine. That's how we're going to get some of our land back. Golf at my golf course, come to our hotel. And I want to see that happen here in Saskatchewan. Not far from here is Whitecap. They have the finest First Nation golf course in the entire country. So there is good economic development happening here in this province. We just need to see more of it. Lim lim, thank you.
Folks, we have a unique opportunity for 2 questions of the chief. Let's take advantage of it. Take one of the mics, please. Oh, might be recorded.
I don't really want to ask a question. I just want to thank you very much for coming out here. I've never heard you before. Shelley LaValle from Cowes First Nation. I would like to find a way to bring you back to another event. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Raven Brass. I'm with Treaty 4 News, and I'm from the Ochapowace First Nations. I have well, you said 2 questions, right? I think. I have more, so if you'd like to speak after, that'd be great. First question, what kind of a leader does the AFN need right now?
That's a tough one for me. I firmly believe in the AFN, the Assembly of First Nations. We need a good national organization. But I don't go to AFN meetings. I don't go to most tribal meetings back home. I don't go to most Union to be Chiefs meetings. Those organizations are important. But as a chief, the way I look at things, I cannot cover off all the bases that's needed to be covered. So I'm lucky I have a council member who loves going to those political meetings. I cover the business base. If you want to be an expert at something or be a good teacher, you got to concentrate on your classroom. You can't be running all over the place. The only time I travel is when I'm doing what I'm doing here now. I stay away from most Chiefs meetings because I have a problem with most Chiefs. They can't even show up on time. And if you don't show up on time with me, you're already off of my list. I don't even want to be around you because I've been taught being on time shows you care. So if you don't care, I don't want to be around you. But to me, our national chief needs to focus on a business relationship with the provinces and with Canada. When our people handed the Prime Minister that 2-row wampum belt at the First Nations Crown Gathering not long ago, that 2-row wampum belt, those things are really old, but they symbolize, they have 2 figures side by side, not one in front of the other. Again, symbolizes the business relationship, not a dependency relationship that currently exists. So I want to see the national chief bring a business focus to the AFN and make the economy. One of our past national chiefs said this, and this is one of the best quotes I've ever heard. It's the economic horse that pulls the social cart. Too many of our leaders are trying to put the cart before the horse. It doesn't work that way. It's the economic horse that pulls the social cart.